thanks everybody for introducing yourselves and kind of letting us know what what's on your mind, how you're entering the space. So we'll have more time for questions and discussion after we hear from the speaker. But before we hear from Adam about climate activism and hope, we want to get to hear from our regional groups about what's happening there. So we'll start with Rosemarie with the triad.
Yeah. In the triad, we've been holding monthly climate cafes, and they're a combination of showing up with how we're feeling about things and being able to spend some time talking about that, and then having someone usually speak to us about some area of work that they're doing in terms of climate justice. So this last one was interesting. It varied a little bit. We have a friend who is a professor at UNCG, and she brought one of her classes to join us, and they essentially led the cafe. So they showed up with questions for us. They wanted to know what the elders are thinking and doing. And they shared with us the area that each of them is most interested in working on. And so it really sparked a great conversation back and forth. And for me, it made me feel like, okay, at some level, it's going to be okay because the young people are really showing up, and there are many other examples of that. But they were just so really sincere and deep about it all. So it was a great exchange. And then that was followed by a presentation, Solarize the Triad. So they were sharing not only how you can do that, but what's going on in the triad, which was, I think, a lot more than we were aware of in terms of solarizing. And then next time, we'll have a discussion led by Guilford Clean Power Coalition. And again, we always take time to just say where we're coming from and how we're feeling and be able to give some support to each other. Yeah.
And I think it's my turn. Howdy. I'm the Democratized Energy Liaison with Cheryl, so I'll be giving you some updates and some actions that you can take. Tonight after this at 6:30 in DC, and thankfully on live stream, there's an event called the Climate Fight Ahead. And so the fight for climate justice continues, rally with movement leaders and leading members of Congress. So Rashida Zain, Reverend Yearwood, some folks that Third Act have been working with for a while will be part of it, and along with others. I will put all that information in there. And if you want to join, you're going to have to click on that link to be able to go and join that at 6:30 tonight. Ridge Graham from Appalachian Voices has a really good article about the carbon plan. Duke Energy to delay the carbon reduction goals in North Carolina. I'll put that in there. And then also Sue Sturgis, who's in Raleigh, she works for Energy and Policy Institute, and she wrote a really good article, very upsetting, not surprisingly, but Duke Energy New, documenting Duke Energy's early knowledge and ongoing deception about climate change. I'll put that in there also. We've talked before on this call and in emails about the Southeast Supply Enhancement Project, the proposed project. And so there is a virtual comment party on December the 9th to help you figure out what you want to do for the comments. And that's December 9th, and I'll put that in there. We're also about climate and democracy, right? And so you all have already heard about this terrible Senate Bill 382 that unfortunately the majority approved yesterday. And then it looks like the House will be voting on it the 11th. It could possibly be the 10th. I was talking to the LA with Representative Longus, who is my representative today. And so far, they're still thinking that election, that vote will be happening on the 11th. And when they voted the first time around before Cooper vetoed it, 3 representatives from Western North Carolina voted the right way because there's nothing in here for the hurricane relief. It's they're terming it hurricane relief, but they just want to take away power from Governor Cooper, Governor Stein and AG Jackson, you know, our new folks that were in there, right? So it's terrible bill, as you well know. So I'll put a link in there for you to contact your representatives. And then also some of you, especially in the Triangle area, but we've also have people around the state that have attended Moral Mondays before. That started, I forget when that first started, like in 14, 17, I forget. Reverend Barber, this is even before the Poor People's Campaign started up. We're going to have another one on the 9th with Reverend Barber, and they're trying to pull everybody out there and speak out. So that's Monday night at 5:30 at the state capitol. And then I'm going to put a couple of really nice articles. It's Karen and Cheryl, you'll like this, especially The Power of the People Heals by Kelly Hayes. And she spoke with the Asheville organizer. It's really beautiful. And this was 2 months after Helene. And then some of y'all are probably fans of Robin Wall Kimmerer. And there's a really beautiful interview with her on the Emergency Magazine. So I will put that in there too. And I will pass it on to Karen, the other Karen.
Karen Willie here. All right. So I'm going to give you an update on what's going on in Asheville. We have water coming out of our taps, which was the big news. It's been almost 2 weeks now, so that's really nice. So we're just kind of taking it slow. I apologize to folks in our region. We have not been meeting. We'll probably, maybe in January, we'll do some renew our climate cafes, but we're not sure yet. So we will keep you posted. And we're still looking for folks to take a lead on on our coordinating committee in Charlotte. Charlotte and in the Coastal Plain, Wilmington area. So if you know of anyone or if you yourself are interested, let us know. And I will put some places in some links in the chat of local. There's 3 local groups that are taking donations and directly working with people who are still intense in the snow. So it's horrifying to think what our neighbors are going through, who are not as lucky as us, who are up a little higher here and didn't get caught in any landslides. So it's sobering. So I'll put those in the chat. And for those of you who are new, we always send a link to everyone who's here. We'll send the chat out to you, so you can get all the links in your inbox and don't have to worry about copying everything. So with that, I'm going to introduce our speaker, who is a dear friend of mine. Adam Ratner has been in the conservation field for over 15 years, leading climate communications and environmental education programming. And I met Adam in 2013 at the New England Aquarium in Boston, where we were both participants in the National Network for Ocean and Climate Change Interpretation. We were study circle members where we learned how to communicate climate by strategically framing our story. So Adam currently serves on the NOCI board of directors, and he is currently based in the San Francisco Bay Area, where he is the director of conservation engagement at the Marine Mammal Center, which is the world's largest marine mammal hospital. He oversees the center's education and communications initiatives. So earlier in his career, Adam was named one of 30 under 30 game changers for the planet by the North American Association for Environmental Education, which is a group that's very near and dear to my heart, as I was an environmental educator for over 20 years. Now I'm retired and member of Third Act. Today, Adam will share with us his positive actions that are providing the hope we need to create climate conversations and climate action around the world. So take it away, Adam.
Thank you so much, Karen. Thank you all for joining today. It's really inspiring just to see so many people on this call as you went around the room sharing kind of what brought you here today, what you're already doing. That's what we need, and just so appreciative of everything Third Act has been doing. I've been a fan of them since the beginning, and great to hear a little bit more of what's happening right in the North Carolina area. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We'll jump into the presentation here. I'll give just a very, very brief introduction to kind of where I'm coming from here, and then we're going to jump right into some of that climate hope. It is not lost on me that I got the email to give this talk the morning after the election. And as we went around the room, hearing that maybe there's a big bar and an expectation here, and hopefully we'll be able to reach that today for all of you. So as Karen mentioned, I'm based in California. I work at the Marine Mammal Center, which is a global leader in ocean health, really looking at what's happening in the ocean and how seals, sea lions, whales, dolphins are sentinels for environment and ocean health, and how connected we are. So we rescue sick and injured animals off the beaches, we get them better, give them a second chance at life, and release them back out to the wild, and have education programs and communication programs that reach globally at this point, helping to inspire that next generation of scientists and stewards. If you just want more information on that, or you need to distract yourself with cute pictures of seals and sea lions, highly encourage you to take a look at marinemammalcenter.org. I also am here on behalf of that National Network for Ocean and Climate Change Interpretation, or NOCI, that Karen talked about. And this is, at this point, an international collective. We've been around for close to 15 years. We've got 800 trained members representing close to 400 different organizations and in almost every single state around the United States. And this is really around how do we use research-based communications to help share a story that's going to move people towards a more solution-minded, hope, and positive kind of mentality. And we've got data showing that because we've been able to reach literally hundreds of millions of people through this unified language, we've been able to shift the needle in the right direction here. Basically, the tactic was, let's take a whole bunch of climate scientists, let's lock them in a room with a whole bunch of social scientists, and figure out how do we talk about climate change? What are some of the metaphors, the values, the techniques that we can do? And then let's get that in the educators and climate communicators and local leaders' hands to really help shift that conversation. If you're interested in more information on that, we have lots of trainings. There's a TED Talk. There's an intensive training that you can do. All of that's available at noki.org, and happy to share more information on that. You also have an incredible resource in Karen to talk to you about NOCI as well. But you came here because I put the words climate hope in the title of the presentation, and I want to really spend the bulk of our time doing that. So what I wanted to really focus on today are a few key things. I want to talk about why hope is important, why you might be able to be just a little bit more hopeful than where you are right now, what people and communities are doing. And then I want to end, whether it's in the Q&A section or just as you go into your other conversations, by crowdsourcing and really hearing from all of you in the chat box what makes you hopeful as well, because this is my perspective and some of the things I found, but truly there is a lot out there in terms of climate action that's really exciting. I know it is difficult to see through some of the mess right now and some of the feelings, and those are all very, very valid thoughts. But there are lots of things out there that give us a sense that we're taking action and moving in the right direction. Now, the last thing I'll say is kind of a preamble here is, as I talk about climate hope, I talk about some of these impactful actions. I don't want to come across, and I hope it doesn't, as this Pollyanna-ish approach. Climate change is real. Climate change is serious. The folks like you in North Carolina know this more than anyone else right now over the last few months. So this is not to say that we are solving it. This is not to say that it's not something to worry about. But as we try and work towards creating change, leading with a sense of action and hope rather than fear has been shown to make a pretty big difference. So I want to share just a couple of things that have really caught my eye over the last kind of few months and few years as I've been in this field. The first is a quote from Dr. Kate Marble. If you're not familiar with her, climate scientist based out of New York, has been an author on some of those big IPCC reports and all those big scientific papers, and just a fantastic communicator. And she shares, as a climate scientist, she actually doesn't have hope. She has something better: certainty. The idea that we know what's causing climate change, and we can absolutely avoid the worst and build a better world in the process. And I highlight this mostly actually for that second point, and it's that we have this opportunity not just to address climate change in this vacuum, but it's that a lot of the things that are climate actions are people actions. They help create a better world for us, addressing things like food poverty, addressing things like public health and safety, community building. And that's where, as we identify some of these values, these actions, we can build a broad coalition of people around it, rather than just those that are necessarily the most concerned about climate change, like the ones that are in the room right here. It's not to say that these folks aren't super important. You are the drivers of it. But as we tell these stories, we talk about these climate actions, the way we talk about them and the benefits that they can bring people, the more diverse those benefits, the more we're going to be able to bring people into the fold. I also want to highlight something from Cristina Figueres, who was essentially the architect of the COP and the Paris Agreement, and still an incredibly vocal advocate for climate change. And she speaks about how hope and fear play into this. And really, it's that sense of fear, that sense of despair. It's perfectly understandable, but it comes with actually baggage and problems. It robs us of the agency, and it makes us vulnerable to actually being able to accomplish what we need to do. So as we try and frame our conversations, it is okay to feel all the feelings, but thinking about what are the advantages and disadvantages of each of those feelings, and how do we leverage those internally as we think about it as individuals, and then think about it collectively as we take action. An interesting study actually around the role of fear, hope, happiness, sadness when it comes to environmentalism. It came out just a few years ago, and I know this is a little bit small up on the screen, but to give you the gist of it, they actually looked at whether the sense of happiness or sadness played any role in people's likeliness to act. And it was that very happy individuals are more likely to act to protect the environment. Those that aren't, don't. And there's obviously a correlation and a causation here, but I do think it's important to realize that scaring people and leading with fear and saying that the world is coming to an end, psychologically, we've seen this over and over again. What that results in is people curling up in a ball and crying. It doesn't necessarily result in people putting on their boots and getting out there and doing things. So if we can talk about the actions that are happening and what we have to gain rather than what we have to lose, we have an opportunity here to really build even more momentum than what you're going to hear about. The other side of it, and then I promise I'll get into the actual actions, but I want to talk about why the sense of hope and solutions is so important, is that it's not just about hope and optimism in this Pollyanna-ish type approach that we have nothing to worry about. It's that there are different types of hope and there are different types of optimism. And it's that we can't just rely on the fact that, oh, the future will all be fine. It'll figure itself out. And a lot of people do have that sense in a way. But we need to have the right kind of optimism, and we need to basically pair a sense of hope with a sense of we have the ability to create change. Hope is built by learning to manage stress, developing positive habits, expanding relationships like Third Act is doing, overcoming obstacles, and then obviously taking action. And when we think about kind of these four buckets of optimism and pessimism and changeable and not changeable, it's really that one in the top corner. We can be optimistic, but there has to be something behind it. So pairing this sense that we can do something to create a healthier world for our communities, if we do something about it, is the most important part. Just lending forward with the future is better, we will be okay, unfortunately doesn't move the needle with our audiences. So we have to have people think the future is changeable so that they feel like they have the power to mold it. And kind of sadly, being optimistic but dissatisfied is the road to progress, because it gives us that thing to work towards. Being complacent and being kind of a complacent optimist, that not changeable optimist, is just as dangerous as being pessimistic. So with all of that philosophically kind of laid out, why hope? We've actually seen that hope's a significant predictor of positive action and engagement on climate change. So the same way happiness, hope is as well. And the most common reason for hope when we survey people all around the world is seeing others act or believing that others believe in this and collective awareness is rising. So we create this environment where people want to jump on board. People want and feel engaged in agency and empowerment as they see others either doing it or talking about it. That's the power of our voices and our actions, that actions are contagious. The problem is that most people in the US aren't hearing about this stuff. So we're creating this spiral of silence, not just around climate change as a whole, and there's a whole bunch of data on that that we can talk about if you really want, but more importantly, not just is climate change happening, is it a problem, but what are people doing to address climate change so that they feel like they're not an individual in this and they can feel like they've got collective action around it. One of my favorite quotes actually from Bill McKibben is something along the lines, I might butcher the exact language, but the best thing you can do as an individual is stop acting like an individual. And that's where our power and our voice comes in, is that we can broadcast that and bring more people in. That's really important. So what does this translate to in reality? So when we think about climate action perspectives, lots of different groups out there do these surveys. Yale has a wonderful program. This one's a study that came out in 2022. But I'm curious, just in the chat box, and I might ask maybe Karen to help read off things, just because it's easier to see the chat box when you're not sharing screen. I'm curious what you think. When people are asked what percentage of people in the United States support major climate mitigation policies. So if I ask you that question, what do you think? What percentage of people think that they support? So like you think, how many people support major climate mitigation policies? What percentage of people?
So I'm seeing 70, 65, 70, 40, 40.
Okay. So a little bit of a range here.
60, 70.
Okay. It's relatively high though. Okay. So what people personally think comes out to anywhere between 66 and 80%, depending on the region. So the second piece of this, though, is what do you think other people think? So when we think about that as individuals, so I think that this amount of people support this. When you ask other people, what do you think they think other people think? Go ahead, put it in the chat box.
All right, I'm getting 40, 25, 20, 40.
Maybe someone's read the paper then.
30.
All right. So we're a highly educated group. The bottom line is it is drastically lower. 2-to-1 difference. So even though people personally think these things and personally support it, they drastically underestimate what their community thinks. This creates a big problem. It creates a false sense of reality. It makes us feel more like individuals than communities because they're just not hearing about people's willingness to support climate action, and particularly in today's political era where it really is black and white. You are either all in one category or all in the other category. Climate isn't one of the top 3 issues for a lot of people around there, but that does not mean they don't care about it and want to support these major climate mitigation policies. So we can still move the needle on some of those because we have to have people behind actions when it comes to politicians and community members. they're not going to do actions purely in a silo. They do have to represent what their community thinks. It's just being overshadowed right now because people are self-silencing. And we've seen that when we actually poll community members, politicians, they're consistently underestimating their community supportive policies. So they have no motivation. They have no reason to start talking about these things in those powerful arenas where they can create change. We have to break that spiral. And interestingly, when people hear about climate change, at least once a month from people that they know, they have a higher sense of political efficacy that we can do things about it. So the simple fact of hearing about climate change can actually create a lot of the change that we need to see. And that's what's great about groups like Third Act, Noki, and others. We're helping to change and shift the conversation so that people are normalizing that concern for climate is normal, that solutions exist, and that we can create this better world. So with all of that, I wanted to take just a few minutes to talk about what are some of the things that are happening that might be more hopeful, and give you a sense of things that we can talk about. I find this comic particularly interesting, the one on the left. My guess is that many of you might be familiar with The Onion. It's a satirical newspaper. This particular one was actually posted, it's over 10 years old. And I think that makes it even funnier in my mind, because we're really not waiting for science to save us here. We haven't been. We have a lot of the solutions already. The roadmap for climate action is pretty clear. What we're lacking is a sense of political will. We're lacking that self of agency and empowerment, and we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot a little bit because we're not able to shift that conversation in that false sense of reality. But I am curious here. So if we think about some of the big sectors, you've got energy, you've got transportation, you've got industry, you've got food. There are solutions in all of these. Unfortunately, with 20 minutes, I don't have a chance to get into all of them, but I wanted to highlight something within transportation. And I'm curious here, you've got 4 options. I'm curious what you think. What percentage of cars sold worldwide this year are electric vehicles? What do you think? Put it in the chat box. 2%, 10%, 15%, 20%? What are we thinking?
I think C, 15, C. Then there's a 20, a 20, a 2, a 10.
Okay, so we get
We're all over the place.
all over the map. You know something? Very selfishly, that means it's a great trivia question. I'm going to take great pride in that. So let's break this down, actually. So it is not 2%. I'm going to tell you that right now. But 2% is actually an interesting number here, because in 2018, so 6 years ago, it was 2%. So 6 years ago, 2% of cars sold worldwide were electric vehicles. This year, 6 years later, it's 20%. That is incredible growth. 1 in 5 cars sold globally are electric vehicles right now. Now, in some places, like Norway, I think it's like 98% of all cars are electric vehicles. In the US, we're at around 1 out of every 8 or 9, I believe. In China, I think it's 1 out of every 5. So everyone's at a slightly different place, but even the US, we're doing pretty good, and globally, we're moving it. Not only this, we're seeing things like double the amount of EVs that are going to be made next year than this year. So there are going to be more models, more options for people. Just in 1 week in 2024, we sold more EVs than all of 2013. So we're seeing all of these things coming together where we now have this new opportunity, this new option when it comes to transportation, that we can take action and have it be more sustainable and eco-friendly. Just in the last year, electric vehicle sales in the US jumped around 46%. So massive growth, and slated for significantly more, because more options are becoming available for folks and more people are hearing this. Still lots of room to go on the whole charging infrastructure, bringing costs down, all of the things, but we're seeing an industry that is being built and sustained and growing rapidly. And that's going to give it some staying power here. That helps build that momentum and normalize it. Within the energy sector, So this past year, 30% of all energy generated around the world came from renewables. That's the highest it's ever been. Still a long way to go, of course, but 30% is rapid growth compared to what we've seen. The world actually in the next 5 years is slated to add as much renewable power as we did the previous 20. So we've got enormous growth. Over the next 5 years, enough global energy, renewable energy produced to equal the entire power capacity of China. That's how much solar and wind energy is coming onto the market. 90% of all of the electrical expansion over the next 5 years is predicted to be renewables. So we're seeing a lot of progress here. Is it as fast as we want it and need it to be? Probably not. But we've consistently underestimated the growth of solar and wind for years and years and years, and they just keep shattering records. Solar energy has grown 8-fold in 10 years. And we think about where we're going. By 2028, just 3 years from now, predicted to gain an additional 11% of global energy generation. Building brand new solar and wind plants or farms, whatever we want to call them, is now cheaper in almost every part of the world than using existing coal plants. So it is actually cheaper to stop using an existing coal plant and build something entirely new with solar or wind in most parts of the world. So again, beyond just the environmental benefits, there's an economic benefit. The train has left the station for a lot of solar and wind. Solar energy is the cheapest energy ever produced in history right now and is just getting cheaper. And one of the things that I found really encouraging, because you keep hearing in the news all about the sun doesn't shine all the time, wind doesn't blow all the time, you have to rely on all these other things. The US actually saw more battery capacity for solar and wind than natural gas generation last year. So we're building those batteries. The cost has dropped, I think, close to 80% at this point over the last 10 years. We now have a system where renewable energy can become the most dominant around our world. We need to keep going. We need to keep pushing, but the technology is there, and we're seeing groups all over the world leaning in and taking advantage of that. One of my favorite examples is actually a school in Arkansas that realized that they had a very inefficient energy system. And they decided to actually cover their parking lot and cover their roofs in solar panels. And it was so cost effective that it saved them so much money. They turned a $250,000 deficit into a $1.8 million surplus for this school district. They then used that to raise teacher salaries and to improve the school. All of this was simply switching from an inefficient coal energy system to solar panels. It gave them energy independence. It gave them more money. All of these co-benefits that make a really big difference. And this is a system that's being copied all over the country right now. Last 5 years, K-12 schools more than doubled the amount of solar energy that came from schools. You've got over 7,000 kids, or I'm sorry, over 7,000 schools nationwide that now utilize solar energy. So this opportunity for kids to be seeing solar energy, the adults in that school to be seeing those benefits. It is over 5 million students attend a school with solar today. And this is something continuing to grow as well. So we see some things on the horizon that are available to all of us. And hopefully this gives us some stories that we can talk to others about so that we can see a world that is better and that people yearn for. There's a quote from the person who founded Grist, which is a newspaper, an online newspaper, that says their goal for their paper is to tell stories and create a world so desirable that people want it right now. And that's what we need to do. We need to give people that thing to reach for and be excited about rather than be scared by. I'm coming right up on time here, so I'm just going to share a few quick things in terms of resources and happy to share, obviously, a lot more in the Q&A. A new book that just came out from Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, a climate scientist, and again, fantastic climate communicator, put out a book, What If We Get It Right? We have the solutions we need. We just need to implement them. Why is no one showing us that it's worth the effort? And that's our opportunity as well as communicators. She's also got a couple TED Talks, a bunch of different books. If you're familiar with All We Can Save, she's one of the co-authors on that. If you're looking for places where you can get more optimism, the Climate Optimist is an online newsletter that's free. Highly recommend. They've got a book as well and a training course. Outrage and Optimism is led by Christina Figueres, the person I mentioned earlier. Noki is always available to you. Project Drawdown is a great resource. And if you do follow people on social media, those three on the right are just beacons of hope and fantastic communicators that I strive to emulate every day I'm doing my work. I'll end with just one last quote, and then I'll share my contact information, open it up to questions. Paul Hawkins, the founder of Project Drawdown, which my guess is many of you are probably familiar with. He looked at the mathematical side of climate solutions. What are the most effective climate solutions, and provided a roadmap on that front. He said, if you look at the science about what's happening on Earth and you aren't pessimistic, you don't understand data. But if you meet the people who are working to restore the Earth and you are an optimistic, you haven't got a pulse. And that's the world that we live in right now. It's not, I think, the world that we want it to be. That's what we're striving for. But it's the communities like Third Act, like Noki, that are bringing people together, providing these outlets for people that set the stage for the action that we're going to be able to create and see move forward. And there are lots of things that have already been plowing forward. There's a lot of things where we're not going back, to be honest. Those industries are established. Those benefits are beloved. We're going to see the growth of some of these things around transportation, around energy production as we move forward. So with that, I'll put up my email address and the obligatory cute photos of elephant seals. It's somewhere in my contract at the Marine Mammal Center every talk. And I will stop sharing and I will open up to questions. I know we've got a little bit of time. As we do some questions, there might be some things in the chat box. If I missed anything, please chime in if I'm not able to find it as we go back in the chat box. But I do encourage you as well, in the chat box, it sounds like they're always going to send out these. If there are actions, if there are solutions, if there are things that are giving you hope right now, put those in the chat box, share those, and let's crowdsource that as well. But I will go ahead and answer any questions you have and appreciate all the time that you spent today. Thank you all.
Thanks, Adam. So any questions? I'll let Cheryl take over.
Thank you so much. So if you have stories or feelings about hope, about what you would like to see, or questions for Adam about that, please raise your hand.
I'll ask a question. So Adam, when you were talking about, different groups or different kinds of organizations, not just climate, getting together, to form coalitions, can you give us some examples of some of those that you've seen that have worked?
Yeah, I think one of the most prominent that comes to mind just right off the bat was some of the stuff shortly after George Floyd. 4 years ago or so at this point. We think about the movements that are combining environmental justice and social justice with climate change, because climate change affects everything. That's the thing that makes it terrible. But to a certain extent, the fact that it affects everything provides a lot of opportunities for building coalitions. So I forget who, just when they were introducing themselves, was talking about the intersection of public health and climate change. That's huge. And you even hear it across the kind of political aisle. I'm going to try not to get too political here, but like, people want the best water. They want the cleanest air. And there's a little bit of nuance there, obviously, that we need to break through. But air pollution kills more people around the world than I think every single major disease put together. So if we're talking about how do we create a healthy air system for kids, we can talk about that without even needing to talk about climate change. If we want to talk about safe streets, for kids getting to school, if we want to talk about having perhaps cheaper food at our supermarkets and the ability to buy local and support local businesses, we can talk about those things without it being kind of over the top climate focused. So pick and choose your audience. Everyone's going to come with a different value system. What are the things that people love? What are the things that people really want and need right now? I can guarantee you within 1 or 2 degrees of separation, you can make that a climate story. And that's the opportunity we have. So what are those things that we need to do? Think about your audiences. Think about what's important in your communities. The options are endless there, truly.
There's someone with a raised hand.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not seeing that.
Yeah, that would be me, Gabrielle.
Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
I heard from a friend that they are using plastic to build road surfaces where you don't get the potholes. And how can we improve on projects like that, work like that, being connected to more communities, more companies, and more people pushing for advancing models that work?
Yeah, it's every single example is going to be a little bit different, so it's hard in a really short period of time to give you the clearest answer. But here's what I will say. Part of it is communicating these things. Very few people, there's a lot of noise out there. And particularly under Trump, I would say there's more chaos and noise than usual in society just because of the way things operate. So hearing about some of those things is the first barrier. So if there are these exciting initiatives, these new industries, these new businesses, trying to broadcast it and showing those industries that you can be an ally for them and therefore be able to help influence things and coach. I think when we talk about plastics in particular, we know that recycling alone is not going to be the end all be all of it. But we need to still recycle things that are out there. And this idea of repurpose and fixing things can give people more reason to do it. And we need to be able to help those industries. We need to get those off the ground. One of the things that's maybe a little bit more environmentally friendly that I've seen is the thing about solar roadways. And there's a pilot project happening, I think, in Arizona or Nevada right now that's being put out there that allows you to do some of these things and test it and see if maybe that's a secret for how we make EVs more usable for us. So we can think outside the box and creatively around these. First part is just knowing that they exist, and that's our role as communicators and community leaders. I saw something from Margaret in the chat box as well. Do you think that the Jobs and Infrastructure Act is making a difference? Yes. I think all of the big things that President Biden was able to pass, so Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, which I should probably know what that stands for, but I unfortunately don't, and the National Infrastructure stuff, they have been shown to make a huge difference, pumping drastic amounts of money into most of the parts of the country, but actually predominantly Republican-led districts, which you could have a lot of mixed emotions around right now, but that means it's going to be a lot harder to claw those back, in fact. So for all of the talk that everything Biden and his legacy are going to just get rolled back, he actually has some pretty bipartisan things that went through in those. The unfortunate reality of it all is things like big plants and commitments to build solar panels in the United States and electric vehicles in the United States and semiconductors in the United States. That takes a long time to build those factories. And then it takes a long time for that impact to be seen in the tax base of the community and new jobs in the community. So we've seen huge amounts of investment, like in the trillions of dollars worth of investments in all these things. But the everyday folks haven't been able to feel the benefits from that yet. And that's where, again, we need to hold our community leaders accountable to not claw those back right now, because we've actually put a huge amount of taxpayer dollars into these things, and there's good reason behind it. But also, we've not been able to have the benefits from it yet, and we want those benefits. And then I think it's important to remember how those benefits came to be, even if it is a few years down the road, and how we connect those dots for people so that they see it wasn't just magic, that those benefits started falling in their lap, and it just happened to be after an election for someone that they liked or didn't like. So that's, again, a communication battle that we're going to have to do over the next 4 years of why are things changing for the better or for the worse, and how do we communicate that effectively?
There's one more raised hand.
Rob had his hand up for a
Rob, go for
while.
it.
And I was noticing that in braiding sweetgrass, Robin said that her students found it very difficult to give examples of humans working cooperatively with nature. And then in this book here, which is a field guide to climate anxiety, the person also is a professor of environmental studies and says she asked her students to imagine a positive future and they couldn't do it. So in today's presentation, thank you for examples of a future that makes more sense and how we get there. Is there an easy to digest, very accessible picture that we can draw or paint for people who don't see a healthy future?
Yes, is the short answer. The longer answer is there are a few resources that come to mind. So GRIST, which I think someone, Margaret, put the link directly in there, highly recommend. They've got a bunch of different newsletters. You can be buried in GRIST articles if you aren't careful. But they've got a particular series called Looking Forward, which really was about creating that world. What does it look like in 20 years, 30 years, 40 years? The book that I shared, Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson's What If We Got It Right, does something similar. All We Can Save from, if you know this book as well. Those are some of the easy resources that I think, similar to braiding sweetgrass, that might help with that. But I think also just that activity. I mentioned really early on, this talk is an abbreviated version of one that I gave to the National Network of Ocean and Climate Change Interpretation that was around a little over an hour. So a lot didn't make the cut for all of you. That is recorded and happy to share it. But I actually started the talk with an exercise that said, for 2 minutes, I want you to close your eyes and I want you to tell me, what does the world look like without fossil fuels? What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you experience? And we got things like, it's quieter. Yeah, it would be actually a lot quieter and more peaceful. It's safer. I can walk places without having to worry too much in the city. It's fresher air. I spend more time in nature. Those are the things that I think people need to hear. And we have what we refer to as a finite pool of worry. And that pool is very full right now. And it's hard to get out of that cycle. And I think actively just asking people and probing and saying, hey, what do you think? What gives you hope? Let's talk about that, and provide those opportunities for dialogue. What are the things that you're noticing are changing here? Again, allows you to have conversations, and they don't need to be about climate change. I come from the San Francisco Bay Area. This is not, we're not flooded with deniers. Let's put it that way. Other regions are very different. Your communities, your neighbors, these don't need to be climate change conversations if they don't have to be. Talk about all the other co-benefits. Talk about protection. Talk about food. Talk about public health. Talk about safety. All these things. Talk about economics even. It all works towards the same thing. There are so many climate actions that are people actions. Lead with actions. Don't lead with fear and problems, and you're going to be moving in the right direction every single time.
Okay, thank you.
There was one question in the chat that I think might be interesting for everyone to hear. So what are the actions we can take right now?
So the things that we can do right now, there's no shortage of them, I will say. The first thing that I will say is talk about it. Talk about it more than what you're currently talking about it, and think about how you talk about it as well. If there are ways that we can lead not from a fear and danger and crisis perspective, even though that's maybe what you feel deep down and that's what we're getting from the news every single day. Think about how we can pivot that conversation. You've already done an amazing thing by being part of a community group that's taking action. So those that have been established in third act, or those that said it's their first time, work with others to figure out what is happening in your local community or your larger region that you are passionate about, that you want to get involved in. Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson has a beautiful Venn diagram for identifying your climate action. And it says, what are you good at? What does your community need? And what brings you joy? And there's the little piece in the middle there. Find that for you. The last thing I'll say, if you're thinking about kind of more as an individual, because you've got this collective stuff, make a plan right now around switching things to electric if you use gas. You don't have to switch right now, but make a plan for it. So whether that's your water heater, whether that's your car, whether that's your stove, whether that's your furnace and air conditioner, make a plan and look at what's out there and do a little bit of work so that when you are ready, or you are forced to be ready, like your furnace stops working, you can make that switch. Those few things, stove, furnace, air conditioner, water heater, they are that car. They are the vast majority of your personal carbon footprint. You don't need to make the change right now and give up on a completely functional water heater type of thing. But make sure that's on your list and make sure you're ready for it if the time comes. Those are the few things that come to mind. I will quickly just address Diane's comment. Yes, fossil fuels on the rise. Energy demand is skyrocketing. So that's why we're not seeing a drop. But we saw a very, very small increase actually globally. And in the US, our energy actually dropped a bit. In the EU, it dropped drastically. So that's where there's a balance. We're using more energy. We're also creating record amounts of renewables. They just don't quite balance.
Well, Adam, thank you very much. I know you have another place to get to.
I have a screaming toddler in the door, right at the
Yes.
door. So yes, I will go to
So,
that one next.
Thank you so much for being here with us. We're really happy to have you. And everyone will get the chat. Yes, let's give Adam a hand.
Thank you, Adam.
So everyone will get a copy of the chat, and so you'll have all this information. And yeah, and let us know what you think. We always like to have feedback.
Yes, thank you all for all your amazing work. I put a couple links in the chat box there. If you're interested in more information, don't hesitate to reach out. You've got my email address as well. But thank you for all of your work in the North Carolina region and all of Third Act's work around the country. It's really admirable and really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.